Linda's hatred for me was no secret, but I never imagined she possessed the courage to take things this far not until I walked into Joe's Stone Crab, adjusted my blazer, and entered to discover a crowded restaurant where conversation and the sound of clinking glasses masked the anger building within me. That's when I spotted it, their gathering. A table set for 12 with pristine white settings, candles glowing, wine already served. My wife, Melissa, sat rigidly near the middle, glancing up at me briefly before quickly returning her attention to her partially empty glass. Her brother Daniel was mid-laugh, whiskey in hand, but when he noticed me, his expression soured as if he'd detected something unpleasant. At the table's head sat Linda, turning toward me with that deliberate, knowing smile she always displayed when she believed she'd made a winning move. "Oh," she exclaimed, placing her manicured hand over her heart with exaggerated shock. "We hadn't expected you to actually show up." I remained motionless, expressionless, because that's when the truth struck me. There was no seat designated for me. Not one forgotten, not one removed. There had never been a place set for me at all. The entire arrangement had been planned without considering my presence. The understanding hit me like a blade to the chest, sharp, deliberate, and merciless. I caught a soft, sympathetic murmur from one of Linda's jewelry-adorned companions, a quiet laugh from Daniel, and then, with an elegant tilt of her head, Linda delivered the final blow. "It appears we're at capacity," she cooed. "Perhaps a mall food court would suit you better." A hush fell, the type that extends uncomfortably, suffocates, and anticipates a response. Melissa's mouth opened slightly, but she remained silent. My hands tensed at my sides, warmth rising up my neck, but I refused to grant her that pleasure. Instead, I released a slow, controlled breath through my nose, then laughed softly. That's when I witnessed it. Linda's composure wavered momentarily, but I noticed it. She had anticipated fury, shame, a defeated retreat, but she was completely unaware of what was coming. So I turned away, not toward the door, not toward the food court, but toward the finest table in the establishment. Because what Linda didn't realize, what none of them understood, was that this restaurant, this empire, belonged to me. I walked past their table deliberately, slowly, allowing the silence to deepen, letting them experience the gravity of their error. Linda's smirk trembled, her confidence shaking just enough for me to relish it. She had always believed she controlled everything, but this wasn't her domain. I walked directly to the prime table in the house, the one with a water view, where the staff practically circled like predators. As I approached, a familiar voice called out, "Kid." "There he is." A hearty, cigar-scented laugh echoed through the restaurant. Heads turned, some of Linda's socialite friends tensed. I turned to see Uncle S rising from his seat at the exclusive corner booth, the kind of table requiring either a 3-month waiting period or a 7-figure bank account. He wasn't dining alone. The table was occupied by influential figures, real estate moguls, CEOs, and several Miami power brokers who wielded more influence in their little fingers than Linda's entire country club circle combined. S spread his arms wide, grinning. "Didn't expect you to make it tonight, kid. We were about to order the house specialty." He patted my back firmly. "Take a seat." I didn't need to request one because the moment I stepped forward, a waiter, one of the experienced ones who understood hierarchy, rushed over, pulling out a chair for me as if I were royalty. That's when I sensed the change. Linda's entire table had fallen silent. The laughter, the whispers, everything had ceased. They were observing, comprehending, because Linda, who had spent years treating me like an unwelcome outsider, was realizing in real time that she had no idea whom she had just attempted to humiliate. That's when I chose to turn the tables. I pivoted, making eye contact with her across the restaurant, then smirked in exactly the same manner she had moments before. "Linda." I called out, my voice as smooth as the whiskey being poured into my glass. Are you certain you wouldn't like to join us? I'd hate for you to feel uncomfortable over there. Her face went pale. Melissa's eyes widened, and Daniel looked as if he had just ingested something unpleasant. But Linda recovered quickly, forcing a strained smile as she raised her champagne. Oh no, dear, she replied, her voice pitched an octave higher than usual. We're perfectly content here. But the way her fingers gripped the glass stem revealed everything. She wasn't content. She wasn't in control. And for the first time since I had married into this family, she understood. I settled back in my chair, allowing the significance of the moment to register. The server placed a crystal glass before me, filled generously with a pour that would humble lesser individuals. I lifted it, taking a measured sip while maintaining eye contact with Linda. She was beginning to unravel. She attempted to maintain her composure, straightening her posture and forcing laughter into her voice as she returned attention to her table, pretending my presence hadn't just detonated an explosion in the center of her carefully orchestrated evening. But she was furious. Melissa, conversely, appeared ready to disappear entirely. I could see the panic in her expression, the mental calculations she was performing to understand how I had reversed the situation so rapidly. Daniel was still processing, his jaw clenched so tightly I half expected something to break, while Linda's friends watched, stealing glances and whispering, leaning closer because suddenly the power balance had shifted, and in a room filled with social climbers. That was entertainment worth observing. Uncle S leaned toward me, his voice low and rough with amusement. What did you do to anger the Botox queen over there? I chuckled, setting down my glass. Simply existed. Burst into laughter, slapping the table. That'll suffice. Then he directed his attention to their table, his expression darkening enough to make me tense, because this had evolved beyond a simple dinner slight. S wasn't merely some uncle who happened to know Joe Stone Crab's owner. He was the owner. This was his establishment. He tapped his fingers on the table before raising his hand, and within moments, a waiter appeared at his side like a soldier responding to orders. S didn't look at him, keeping his gaze fixed on Linda's table as he spoke. Casually, almost boredly, send over a bottle of your finest champagne. Make it the most expensive one available. The waiter nodded and vanished as quickly as he had appeared. I frowned. You're purchasing them drinks? Smirked, but there was something sharp beneath it. Not exactly. Shortly after, the champagne arrived chilled, pristine, carried with the ceremony typically reserved for dignitaries. Just as Linda reached for her glass, believing she had gained some social advantage, the waiter leaned down and murmured loudly. Enough for everyone to hear. Compliments of Mr. Salvatore Romano. Linda froze. Her entire table did. Then slowly, stiffly, she turned to meet my uncle's gaze from across the restaurant. Because now she understood this wasn't coincidence. This wasn't fortunate timing. She had just attempted to humiliate me in my own family's restaurant and had failed. Spectacularly, Linda recovered swiftly, she always did. Years of cosmetic procedures and passive-aggressive warfare had prepared her well. She plastered on a tight smile, lifting the champagne flute as though this had all been part of her strategy. But I noticed the slight trembling of her fingers against the crystal, the way her throat moved when she swallowed whatever insult she wanted to launch across the room. She was shaken. Her guests were murmuring now, shifting uncomfortably, casting uncertain glances as if unsure which side of the conflict they had landed on. Socialites were predators. If they detected weakness, they would turn on their own without hesitation. Linda knew this. She also knew she couldn't afford to lose face in front of them, so she did what she excelled at. She escalated. She raised her glass higher, displaying a grin that was slightly too sharp. Well, she purred, her voice like sweetened poison. I suppose connections are indeed a family trait. She intended it as an insult, a way to reframe the power dynamic, to remind me that I had married her daughter, that I remained somehow beneath them. I simply smiled, slow and purposeful. "That's correct, Linda," I said smoothly. "And that's precisely why I knew you'd appreciate the little surprise I arranged for tonight." Her smile wavered. "Surprise?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the immaculate white tablecloth. "You see, I wanted to make this birthday memorable for you," I said, drawing out the words just enough to build anticipation. "So I made a call. Before arriving, ensuring you received the complete VIP treatment at Joe's." Linda's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what exactly does that entail?" As if choreographed, a team of servers appeared, gliding toward Linda's table in perfect unison, silver domed trays in their hands. She blinked, her guests straightened with curiosity. Melissa looked at me as if uncertain whether to be impressed or terrified. Then, in one fluid movement, the waiters lifted the silver covers and the table gasped. Because instead of the sophisticated entrees they had ordered, the plates before them were heaped with Joe's messiest, most primitive dishes. Mountains of king crab legs drowning in butter, served alongside garlic mashed potatoes so rich they could cause cardiac arrest from 20 feet away. There was a steaming platter of fried shrimp so heavily battered it resembled armor plating. And the centerpiece, a massive dripping rack of barbecue glazed ribs, the kind requiring both hands, multiple napkins, and a willingness to look absolutely savage while consuming every morsel. Finger foods. The type of meal demanding cracking, gnawing, and licking butter from your knuckles. A meal no high society socialite in a white dress wanted anywhere near. Them. Linda's jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might damage her dental work. I sipped my whiskey, watching the horror unfold. "You mentioned a food court was more my style," I murmured just loudly enough for her to hear. "So I thought, why not bring some of that charm to you?" Silence. Linda's nostrils flared. Daniel coughed, clearly suppressing laughter. One woman at the table, a friend of Linda's with a face stretched tight from excessive cosmetic surgery, stared at her ribs as if they were an enemy combatant. One by one, Linda's guests slowly pushed away their plates, exchanging glances and barely concealed discomfort. Because the truth was, Linda hadn't merely lost tonight, she had lost publicly. And in her world, that was a wound that never healed. For several excruciating seconds, Linda remained motionless and speechless. She simply stared at the pile of butter-drenched chaos before her, as if it were a personal affront crafted by the gods themselves. Then very slowly she lifted her gaze to me, and I swear if looks could kill, I would have been a cautionary tale on the evening news. Her fingers flexed against the tablecloth. She was calculating rapidly, scrambling for an escape, a way to reverse the narrative before it consumed her entirely. But there wasn't one not this time, because now the entire restaurant was watching. Not just her guests, not just her table, everyone. The staff, other patrons, the type of Miami elite who never acknowledged her existence but were very interested in witnessing the supposedly untouchable Linda Prescott appearing as though she had just lost a heavyweight bout to a plate of barbecue. Ribs stopped just when I thought she might actually explode. She laughed. Not naturally, not even close. It was that high, brittle social survival laugh designed to convince the room that everything was fine. That she was fine, that this was all part of some elaborate joke she was graciously participating in. "Oh, how delightful," she exclaimed, lifting a single crab leg between her fingers as if it were radioactive. "What a charming little twist." Melissa stared at her mother as if she had grown a second head. Daniel buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The rest of the table sat frozen, caught between terror and secondhand embarrassment. And me? I smiled because I wasn't finished not yet. I leaned back in my chair, slow and deliberate, savoring every second of her misery. Well, I'm so pleased. You're enjoying it, Linda, I said smoothly, because I took one more liberty with tonight's menu. Linda's eyes snapped to me, her smile faltering. What? At that precise moment, a very nervous-looking waiter appeared at her side, carrying a birthday cake. But not just any cake. This was not the elegant, refined dessert she had undoubtedly pre-selected for herself. This was a monstrosity, a three-tiered, neon-colored, cartoonishly massive creation completely covered in rainbow sprinkles and crowned with a pair of gold-numbered candles, a giant, unavoidable 6 and 0, a children's birthday cake for a 60-year-old woman who had spent decades lying about her age, Linda gasped. The entire table did, because she hadn't just been served a ridiculous cake, she had been exposed. I watched, fascinated as her perfectly curated expression began to fracture the small twitches around her eyes, the slight trembling of her lips. For the first time in her life, Linda Prescott was speechless. I exhaled, feigning disappointment. Oh, no, I murmured, tilting my head. Did I get the number wrong? Daniel wheezed. His wife snorted. Even the waiter looked ready to flee before Linda could decide whom to blame for this catastrophe, but I wasn't finished. I reached forward, picked up a fork, and offered it to her. Come on, Linda, I said, my voice thick with mock encouragement. Make a wish. For the first time in her life, Linda Prescott was truly speechless. She sat there, eyes locked on the massive sugar-coated monument to her greatest insecurity, her fingers curled against the tablecloth as if fighting the overwhelming urge to launch the entire cake directly at my face. How I wish she would, because then at least she would be genuine. Instead, she did what she always did. She forced herself back into control. Her lips pressed together in a brittle smile, the kind that barely stretched across her frozen features. What a thoughtful gesture, she finally managed, her voice so tight it could have snapped. She reached for the fork in my hand as if it were a loaded weapon. That's when Daniel Sweet, drunk, ready to watch the world burn Daniel, did the unthinkable. He clapped his hands together, grinning. Well, hell, if we're celebrating, let's do it properly. Come on, everyone, happy birthday to you. His voice boomed. The entire restaurant froze. And then came the death blow. A few tables actually joined in. Some were simply intoxicated and enthusiastic. Others were clearly Linda's petty enemies taking sadistic pleasure in the moment. A couple of women at the restaurant's far end had no idea who she even was, but the moment they saw the cake, they participated wholeheartedly. I bit my cheek, watching as Linda's soul visibly departed her body. Her jaw locked, her eyelid twitched, and when she turned to Melissa, her own daughter, begging for rescue, Melissa simply shrugged and joined in. Happy birthday, dear Linda. I swear I thought she might burst a blood vessel right there at the table. I leaned in, my voice low enough for only her to hear. You should extinguish the candles before the wax melts, Linda. Her breath caught, but she complied, because at this point, what alternative did she have? With the restaurant watching, with her reputation already in ruins, she inhaled sharply and blew out the candles in one violent puff. The room erupted in applause. Daniel actually stood and cheered. A nearby couple clinked their glasses. The table behind her whispered in barely contained glee. And Linda sat there, trapped in the wreckage of her own failed ambush, staring at the gaudy disaster of a cake before her as if it had personally declared war on her entire existence. That was the moment she realized she hadn't just lost, she had been obliterated. And I was just beginning. Linda remained seated, her entire body so rigid I thought she might shatter. The restaurant continued buzzing with whispers, muffled laughter, and the occasional clink of glasses as people reveled in the spectacle of her downfall. She was humiliated, exposed, and I knew she was battling the urge to do something drastic, overturn the table, storm out, drag me outside, and assault me with her designer clutch. But she wouldn't, because Linda Prescott never lost publicly. At least not until tonight. I leaned back casually, swirling the whiskey in my glass. So I mused, watching her actively dissociate from reality. Should we cut the cake, or shall we proceed directly to gifts? Linda exhaled slowly, regaining just enough composure to lift her champagne flute with a steely grip. Gifts, she said, her voice like iced out. Melissa, who had been working very hard to conceal her enjoyment, perked up slightly. Oh, right, I left yours in the car. Let me just... Don't worry, sweetheart, I interrupted smoothly, placing a hand on hers before she could ruin the moment. I already handled that. Linda's eyes snapped to mine. Oh, she said, her voice brittle. How considerate. I smiled, always. And with that, I nodded toward the waiter, who had been waiting for this exact moment. From behind the bar, he retrieved a small, gift-wrapped box, the kind that appeared expensive and elegant. Linda eyed it suspiciously, and I could see her. Mind racing because after the absolute spectacle of the evening, she didn't trust anything I presented her. Slowly, she peeled back the paper, opened the box, and paused. I watched her expression shift, the way her lips parted slightly, confusion flickering across her features. Because inside that box was a reservation confirmation. Not for just any restaurant, but for the Sterling Room, a place so exclusive that even wealthy individuals couldn't gain entry without the proper connections. A single meal there cost more than a mortgage payment, and it contained a reservation in Linda's name for tomorrow night. Prime seating, full VIP experience. She blinked, then blinked again. I could observe the calculation occurring, trying to identify the trick, the trap, because this wasn't an insult, this was a power move, a lifeline, a way to recover some of the dignity she had lost tonight. If she played it correctly, she could tell her friends this had all been an elaborate joke, that she had known all along, that she had been part of it, and that this dinner, this disaster, was merely a prelude to an even bigger, grander celebration. Had given her an escape, and she knew it. Slowly, she set down the paper, smoothed her dress, lifted her chin slightly before meeting my gaze with careful, measured control. Well, she murmured, I suppose I underestimated you. I took a slow sip of my whiskey. No, Linda, I said, smiling. You never even saw me coming. Linda held my gaze for a long moment, the wheels still turning in her head. She wouldn't admit defeat, not outright, but she didn't need to because we both knew she had lost. I stood, adjusting my cuffs, feeling the weight of every eye in the room still focused on us. Then I smiled. Enjoy your birthday, Linda. She lifted her champagne glass in a mock toast, her grip still slightly too tight. Oh, I will. I leaned down slightly, just enough for only her to hear. Perhaps next time, save me a seat. And with that, I turned, leaving her there surrounded by her own mess. As I walked back toward my actual table, Uncle S chuckled, shaking his head. You really are my nephew, aren't you? I simply grinned, picking up my drink. From across the room, I caught Melissa watching me with a strange, unreadable expression. And as Linda sat there, trapped in the wreckage of her own failed ambush, I took one final sip of whiskey. The night was over, but the game had just begun.